Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we're going to be looking at the economic outlook for the state of New Mexico. My name is Julia. I'm an associate here at REMI, and I'm also joined by my colleague, Mei Lin, who's one of our economic analysts. So looking at what we're going to go through in the presentation today, first we're going to look at REMI and what we do. We're going to look at a big picture comparison of New Mexico versus the rest of the United States through the REMI Regional Growth Matrix. Then we're going to look at the economic outlook for New Mexico, looking at short-term forecasts and long-term forecasts, and we're also going to do that for the United States as a whole as well, going through the short and the long term. And then following that, we're going to go through a model demonstration. So demonstrating our PI Plus model. Throughout the presentation, please feel free to put questions in the question and answer column, and we will be sure to answer those right after during our brief Q&A session. So REMI was founded 40 years ago on the transformative idea that government decision makers should test the economic effects of the policies they put into place before they're implemented. And we've expanded greatly beyond just that, working with private organizations as well, and just other economic development corporations. But the core idea stays the same. We're trying to shed light on all the direct and indirect and induced effects of economic policy and economic action. We work with corporations and government through all sectors, including energy and environment, tax and fiscal policy. We work in transportation and infrastructure, as well as just any other action that's going to have some sort of economic impact. So we work on the local, state, and national level, and we're the nation's leaders in dynamic policy modeling. And some of our clients are listed below. So looking into the New Mexico state economy, New Mexico is the 36th most populous and the 5th most expansive of the United States, with a population of 2.105 million people, a median age of 37.8, and a median household income of just under $50,000. It has a population growth rank of 37. It ranks 17th for business growth rate, and it also ranks 25th for gross state product growth rank. As far as largest contributors to gross state product are concerned, these sectors include real estate, rental and leasing, mining and resource extraction, healthcare and social assistance, and professional, scientific, and technical services. Two important aspects of the New Mexico's economy are scientific research, such as nuclear energy research and mining of natural resources, such as oil, natural gas, uranium, potash, copper, coal, zinc, and silver. New Mexico is actually the country's top producer of chili peppers and perlite. So that's a glass used in insulation and gardening. Looking into the short-term outlook of New Mexico, here we have a few graphs produced by our models projecting out to 2023. And you'll see here a pretty common pattern that we've seen throughout many of the other states we've looked at as well, where we're seeing output and gross domestic product dip slightly and then recover after 2020. Personal income is pretty much staying the same. And then below we have total employment. And here again, we're seeing a very, very similar trend as we've seen throughout the United States, where there's a huge dip in employment in 2020, but then it recovers back quickly. And here we're seeing New Mexico almost back to full employment, a little quicker than a lot of other states, looking at about 2022, where we hit that level again, or just probably in the middle of 2022 somewhere. So as far as the growth we expect from 2021 to 2020, we're expecting personal income to grow at 3.8%, GDP 3.5%, output 3.5%, and employment plus 36,000 jobs. But as with all economic modeling, there's a degree of uncertainty that comes with this. As far as we're uncertain about how much consumer pent-up demand there is within the economy, given this period of quarantine and inaction in a lot of homes. And then we're also uncertain as to how effective the policies will be rolled out and how quickly those will be rolled out as well, and the effect they'll have on consumer confidence. Looking at putting it into a broader picture, we are going to look at it through the regional growth matrix here. And of course, the economy is full of many different factors and a lot of very complicated things, but we've tried to break it down and look at a broader picture. So here we have economic factors and demographic factors that we're going to look at as a comparison between states. With a favorable mark for economic factors, you're going to see industry growth, strong industry clusters, high paid industries, high productivity and low business costs, versus the unfavorable of declining industries, weak industry clusters, low paid industries, low productivity and high business costs. And then as far as demographic factors are concerned, for the favorable, we're going to be looking at a younger population, populations gaining retirees, a lot of immigration, both international and economic, from domestic areas, as well as high amenities and low housing costs. With unfavorable demographic factors, we're going to see older populations losing retirees, low immigration, of all sorts, and low amenities and high housing costs. So here we have it plotted on an XY chart. We have employment plotted on the XY axis, and then population plotted, employment on the Y axis, excuse me, and then population here on the X axis. With favorable population growth and favorable employment, we're going to classify those as growth economies. And then on the opposite end of that, we're going to see transitional economies, which are seeing decreases in employment and population as well. Up to the upper left-hand quadrant, you have your Renaissance economies, so that is a combination. And here we're seeing declining population for various environmental reasons, possibly not preferred climate or other things like that. And then, but also high employment growth, and that's due to well-established industries transforming into more growth-related industries and actually seeing those employment numbers increase. And then on the other end of that spectrum, we have lifestyle economies, which these are going to be seeing low and unfavorable unemployment, and then also high population growth. And the population growth is often due to factors such as climate, like we mentioned earlier, or other positive factors that aren't necessarily economic. Here we're seeing New Mexico plotted in relation to the United States average as a whole. So that US average is going to be our 0 point on the graph. And again, these are projections from 2021 to 2022. And we're seeing that New Mexico State is just barely falling into that transitional economy. So it's 0.1% lower than the United States average in employment growth and 0.5% lower than the United States average in population growth. Looking at the data sources we used, we use our Bureau of Labor Statistics forecast data for our standard national yearly control. And this, like I said, is updated yearly. With the pandemic and the changing environment that has come along with that, as well as all the uncertainty, we've been updating our data monthly. So we've been using data from Bureau of Economic Analysis. We've been using data from University of Michigan's Research Seminar in Quantitative Economics. And we've also been using an outlook from the Congressional Budget Office. And these monthly updates, they include the $1.6 trillion stimulus, additional vaccination, and additional consumer spending. You'll notice that the stimulus is actually lower than the stimulus that was passed. That's because these estimates and forecasts came out before any of that actually got through the House, the Senate, and came across Biden's desk. So this was a conservative estimate as to what would actually get through within the bill. But of course, 1.9 trillion actually did. So it will work very well for our purposes, but that is just a caveat. Looking now at the national outlook in the short term, again, we're looking at 2019 to 2023. And again, you're seeing very similar patterns to what we saw in New Mexico. A little bit less steep of growth in unemployment for the United States than we saw in New Mexico originally. But again, that little blip in output and gross domestic product in 2020 back on the rise. And then also with the United States, you're seeing a similar pattern where 2022 is just almost hitting that recovery employment, but fully by 2023. And then here we're expecting growth in personal income of 2.9%, GDP 4.4%, output 4.4%, and then plus 7 million jobs. So looking at the outlook for the United States in the long term, again, we're seeing some steady growth here from 2021 to 2060 in gross domestic product, personal income, and output. And then total employment is also rising consistently as well. So we're looking here at an average growth per year of personal income of 1.9%, GDP 1.8%, output 1.9%, and total employment plus around 1 million jobs per year. Now going into the regional outlook for New Mexico. Here we have a pie chart of the fastest growing industries in New Mexico projected in 2021. So we're expecting a growth here of 13.7 thousand jobs, just about in these top 5 industries, with 18.6 thousand jobs in all other industries. So these industries you'll see here are healthcare and social assistance, educational services, other services, wholesale trade, arts, entertainment, and recreation. And then as far as industries with the highest average annual compensation rates in New Mexico, again, this was projected through our models, and here we're looking at utilities, management of companies and enterprises, mining, professional, scientific, and technical services, and then wholesale trade, with professional and scientific and technical services, and then wholesale trade, as well as mining, all sort of hit by the pandemic, but recovering rather quickly, and then management, and then utilities staying rather consistent. Our models also take into account demographic factors. So here we're looking at a projected population pyramid for 2021. Here it's near stationary to constrictive population pyramid. So what that means is that the near stationary is the population is staying relatively similar. So the cohort coming out, or cohort entering the population, is going to be about the same as those populations ahead of it. But it's also a bit constrictive because you see that block of age 20 to about 38 that's larger than those cohorts coming in. So that's kind of what we're looking at here, and that constrictive again means that that population that's coming in is going to actually be smaller than the populations in front of it, and so we're going to get a declining or shrinking population. Here we're looking at population components broken down. We have a starting population of 2.1 million people, and then projected 23.8 thousand births, 19,000 deaths, add on net retired migrants, subtract net economic migrants, and then net international migrants, net special populations, and all those added together are seeing an ending population of 2.105 million rather than 2.101. Long-term outlook of New Mexico, very similar patterns to what we saw with the United States forecast, with steady growth in gross domestic product, output, and personal income, as well as very steady growth in employment. Personal income we're seeing an average growth per year of 1.8%, GDP 1.6%, output 1.8%, and total employment plus around 5,000 jobs. Looking at industries that are growing the quickest, we have about 141,000 jobs being added within these industries in the next 40 years. And then all other industries, we're seeing a growth of about 70,000 jobs as well. So these have switched up a little bit from the short-term fastest growing industries that we saw earlier. Now we're looking at mining, healthcare and social assistance, forestry, fishing and hunting, professional, scientific and technical services, and then transportation and warehousing. Again, here now we have a little bit more room for movement as far as the highest average annual compensation rates from 2020 to 2060. And you're seeing mining really increase in the next 40 years, as well as manufacturing, with wholesale trade actually going down, as well as information seeming to go down, and then utilities staying pretty much the same. Here we have a graphic that, again, was produced by our models, taking into account demographic projections as far as the population is concerned. So you'll see it's morphing into that definitely more constrictive type population. So here is the population pyramid in static for 2060. And again, you're seeing that constrictive population. So that means it's going to be a shrinking population with that cohort that is coming in, again, being smaller than the cohorts aging in front of it. Longer term population components, again, starting at 2.101 million people, and then add on about 900,000 births, subtract 950,000 deaths, add on net retired migrants, net economic migrants, and net international migrants, and then subtract a few for net special populations, and we get an ending population of 2.291 million people. So now, without further ado, I'm going to pass the presentation on to May, who's going to give us a quick model demonstration.
Thank you, Julia. In a model demonstration, we will run the scenario of an optimistic outlook. We have seen the national baseline quarterly of the RSQE, CBO, and BA, where the total employment slowly comes back, accompanied by steady growth. But as Julia mentioned, there will be a lot of uncertainty, including large pent-up consumer demand, supports of vaccine, and stimulus checks. Although it's very difficult to quantify all these impacts, we would like to try a little experiment inspired by Janet Yellen, who predicted that the economy could be back to full employment by the end of this year, 2021. We wanted to test what growth we will have to see in the economy to make that happen. After testing, we imported a macroeconomic update increasing the GDP growth rate by 2%. Now let's take a look at the economy changes, especially the total employment changes both on the national level and the state level. On the left, there is total employment in the US, and on the right in Mexico, in New Mexico, with the blue lines representing our baseline forecast and the orange lines representing a forecast where the growth in every component of GDP has been increased by 2%. So if consumption grew by 0.5% from year to year, now it grows at 2.5%. With that, the US gets back to normal by 2021 and begins to exceed its previous employment in 2022 and 2023. And New Mexico is having a very similar recovering trend. But please bear in mind that a 2% increase in the components of GDP is very optimistic. So only if the vaccine rollout continues smoothly or ahead of schedule, and if consumer confidence really picks up, we might see something approaching this. Now let's show off the model and explore more about the job increase from the baseline to the optimistic outlook. The model we're using is the REMI PI Plus model, which covers 51 regions, including the 50 states as well as the DC area. We're looking at its home screen, whose purpose is to provide quick and simple access points for starting the use of the REMI model and to simulate policy changes. By clicking on the appropriate tiles, you can start creating any one of the 4 types of forecasts available in PI Plus: regional simulations, national simulations, regional controls, and national controls. If you're interested in exploring REMI's default control forecasts that form the basis of the model, you can dig directly into the data by clicking on the regional forecast or national forecast. Let's do regional forecast here. And the selected forecast will be open. It shows only the results section. Some specific tables, maps, and data visualizations have been specially chosen to display REMI's baseline forecast and provide informative profiles of the national as well as regional economies. For the short-term and long-term outlooks, we use national control to import the March update, while for now, we're using this function again, but here in the macroeconomic values, instead of the baseline, which is this one, economic forecast update March 2021, instead of it, we're using the optimistic update. After choosing it, it shows as macroeconomic change in the input list. And then the next step is to run the forecast. Instead of waiting for it to run, let's jump directly into the results. Here in the results section, we're looking at the region of New Mexico and years from 2021 to 2030. We notice that there are 2 lines for the GDP, and we have the lower line representing the regional control for the baseline and the upper line representing the regional simulation for optimistic outlook. We imported this difference in the GDP, and as a result, we have the differences between the total employment of the baseline and the optimistic outlook. We can also see that the gap between these 2 employment is increasing over years. To explore more about the employment, we can look at employment by industry. If we have the comparison type as levels, we will have the actual number of the job numbers. If we want to see the differences between the 2 outlooks, the baseline and the optimistic one, we can change the comparison type into differences, so we know which industries are contributing the most job increase. By zooming in, we can see that the top industries are state and local government, healthcare and social assistance, as well as retail trade. Besides differences, another very interesting comparison type is percentage change. So percentage change will show the industries that are growing the fastest. Again, let's zoom in and retail trade again. Federal civilian services, as well as federal military. These are some industries that are growing very fast. Hopefully, these functions can give you a better idea of what is happening behind the increase in total employment. Now I'm going to give it back to Julia for the conclusion.
Thank you, May. So as we discussed earlier, economic forecasts are a very difficult thing, especially with the outbreak of the pandemic and the unprecedented actions taken during that time, as well as the recent election of a new president who is handling policy in a very different manner. So that, along with just general uncertainty and complexity within the economy, there is a lot of uncertainty that comes along with all of that, but REMI is there to help shed light on that complexity and that uncertainty as much as possible. And through our models, we're able to help you clarify those complex situations and shed light on the direct and indirect and induced effects of any economic policy that you could want to put in place. We're going to calculate a quantitative narrative to really help you to communicate that in a simple and easily understandable manner. And then we, through our what if scenarios, we're able to really understand all the different options that you have as far as policy decision is concerned and economic actions to be taken. And then our results are going to come back, and because of their dynamic nature, they're going to be the most robust results that you can get.